My son texted me, "We're cutting ties. Don't come to family dinner anymore." Just like that. And the entire family group chat sat in silence, watching it unfold. The very next morning I made one phone call. The kind of call that would unravel everything he'd spent years trying to build. If you're listening to this, don't forget to subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. What Brian didn't know was that I'd been quietly gathering evidence against him for 3 whole years. That message came through at exactly 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember because I was in my apartment in Pacific Heights, wearing my grandmother's pearl necklace, sipping on a green juice when the family chat buzzed. 30 years of tradition, wiped out with a few taps of a thumb. "Mom, we've decided it's time to cut ties. Don't plan on coming to family dinners anymore. It's what's best for everyone." I stared at that message, frozen, watching the checkmarks appear as everyone in the chat read it. Kelly, my picture-perfect daughter-in-law, responded with a crying laughing emoji. My brother Tom didn't reply at all, just left it on read. Melissa, my sister-in-law, sent back a sound effect. Crickets. Not a single one of them stood up for me. I took a screenshot. "Always keep evidence, sweetheart. Always." Then I started scrolling back through the old messages. And slowly the full picture came together. There were birthday parties I was never invited to, weekend trips they planned without even telling me, holidays and celebrations that happened like I didn't exist at all. It was like they had built a second life. A whole parallel universe, where Linda Harper had been erased. How modern of them. The last photo Kelly shared in the chat was from their vacation in Cape May. Those designer swimsuits? That fancy champagne toast? All of it had been paid for with my money. Brian's salary, which came from the company I founded, had covered every luxurious, caviar-topped moment. The irony? So thick you could serve it at one of their dinner parties. I set my phone down and walked to the kitchen window. 67 floors below me, the city of San Francisco buzzed with energy. People out there building empires, closing deals, crushing enemies. And I thought, how fitting. As today I'd be joining them. My landline phone sat quietly on the marble countertop, like an old friend waiting for its moment. I picked it up and dialed the number I had memorized 3 years ago but never used. I'd been saving it for a moment just like this one. 2 rings. "Linda Harper," I said as soon as the woman answered. "I think it's time we had that conversation." There was a pause followed by a deep, knowing laugh, the kind that sent a chill down my spine. "I was wondering when you'd finally call," she said. "Well, wonder no more. How fast can you get here?" "I'll be there in an hour." I hung up and caught a glimpse of my reflection in the chrome finish of the coffee maker. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who had read that text just 90 minutes ago. This woman had straightened her back, lifted her chin, and had something sharp and dangerous glittering in her eyes. Brian wanted to cut ties? Perfect. I'd hand him scissors so sharp he wouldn't even feel the cut, not until he was already bleeding. My phone buzzed again. It was Brian calling from his office number, probably in a full-blown panic over my silence. I declined the call. He tried again. And again. And again. It was delicious. Just 24 hours ago I was a burden to him. Suddenly I was worth frantic calls. I opened the family chat and typed, "Message received." Loud and clear. "Enjoy your last family dinner." And then I left the group. Some bridges you burn quietly. Others, you blow them to hell and watch the pieces crash into the river below. Today I felt especially explosive. The meltdown came fast, like a tsunami. Within minutes, Brian had called me 17 times, then switched to texting, each message more panicked than the last. I poured myself a glass of champagne, leaned back, and watched his desperation pour through the screen while I calmly planned exactly how I was going to take back everything he stole. "Mom, what did you mean by last dinner? Answer your phone. This isn't funny anymore. Kelly's having a panic attack. Are you happy now? She's hyperventilating." Oh, that was Rich. The same woman who had spent 2 years systematically cropping me out of family photos was now in a full-blown meltdown, because I finally fought back. I screenshotted every last message. Another file for the growing collection. Then the doorman buzzed from downstairs. "Mrs. Harper, your guest has arrived. Send her up, James." And James, "No interruptions for the next 2 hours. Whatever happens, I'm not available to anyone." A moment later, Diane Whitmore stepped off my elevator like she had just walked out of a hostile corporate takeover, and won. She was dressed in an Armani suit that cost more than most people's cars. Her Louboutin heels looked like they could puncture a man's ego, and her smile? Sharp enough to perform surgery. "Linda," she said as she leaned in to kiss both cheeks. "You look absolutely radiant. Revenge suits you." I smiled. "Oh, Diane. I haven't even started yet." I led her to the living room, where contracts were spread across the coffee table like war maps. "Champagne?" I asked. "We're celebrating." "What exactly are we celebrating?" she asked. "Brian's education," I replied. "He's about to learn what happens when you cut out the woman who built your playground." Diane's eyes sparkled with that hungry predator gleam as she looked over the papers. "These are your Harper & Company shares?" she asked. 49.8%? "I never liked being controlling," I said with a soft laugh. "But I think I'm about to get very comfortable with it." She sank into my Italian leather sofa, crossing her legs with the grace of a woman who'd toppled bigger empires before breakfast. "Tell me everything." Without a word, I reached for the manila folder beside me, thick enough to choke a horse. Inside were bank statements, printed emails, recorded conversations, and photos of Brian and Kelly living way beyond what they should have been able to afford. The kind of evidence I'd gathered could bury someone so deep, they'd need archaeologists to dig them up and label them a historical artifact. Brian thought he was being clever, funneling company money through offshore accounts, setting up fake vendor contracts, writing himself bonuses big enough to make a Fortune 500 CEO blush. I flipped through page after page of financial records. And Kelly, sweet Kelly, had been treating our charitable foundation like her own personal spending account. Diane gave a low whistle. "This is straight-up embezzlement. Multiple felonies, and that's just the appetizer. Fraud, tax evasion, breach of fiduciary duty. It's like they were going down a criminal checklist." My phone started buzzing again. Another call from Brian. I didn't even glance at it before declining. Diane's shark-like grin widened. "You're not picking up?" "Nope," I said calmly. "I learned that tactic from them. Funny how family communication always turns one way when it suits them." I saved Diane's number in my phone under "Partner in Justice." "So," she asked, "what's the end game here?" "Simple," I said. "You buy my shares, but with very specific performance clauses. Clauses that allow you to audit every department, restructure the leadership, and remove anyone found guilty of financial misconduct. Brian is about to learn that actions have consequences. And Kelly, well, she's going to learn that stealing from the wrong woman can permanently end a career." My voice softened just a little. "And my grandson Ethan? He's finally going to see what real strength looks like." Diane signed the contracts with a gold pen that probably cost more than Brian's monthly car payment. "This is going to be spectacular." "Oh, darling," I said, raising my glass to hers, "spectacular doesn't even begin to cover it." The moment that truly justified everything came not through a private message or legal report, but through Kelly's own Instagram nonsense. While Brian was flooding my voicemail with frantic messages, his wife was busy posting Instagram stories from their so-called emergency family meeting, complete with champagne and oysters. Yes, emergency. Meanwhile, I was lounging in silk pajamas, watching their pathetic damage control play out across social media. Kelly had geotagged them at La Fontaine because of course she did. Nothing screams financial crisis like a $200 per person tasting menu. The woman had the survival instincts of a cartoon lemming. But the message that shattered my last sliver of maternal hesitation came from Ethan. My sweet Ethan, just 19 years old, the only one in the family who still had a functioning brain and a soul. He called me around midnight, his voice shaking. "Grandma," he said quietly, "they're saying you've lost your mind. Dad told everyone you're threatening to destroy the business just out of spite." "And what do you think, sweetheart?" "I think they're lying," he said. "You don't do anything out of spite. You do things because they're right." He paused. "But Grandma, they're telling people you never loved Dad. That all you ever cared about was money and power." I sat in the dark, watching the city lights flicker beyond the glass. And in that moment something inside me settled into a hard, shining core of absolute certainty. 35 years. 35 years I spent raising Brian. Building something real, something lasting. A legacy. And this was how they rewrote the story. "Ethan," I said gently, "do you remember when you broke your arm at age 8? "Yeah. Outside your house in Cape May." "Who drove you to the hospital?" "You did." Dad was golfing. Mom was at the spa. And who stayed with you? Who slept in that awful excuse for a chair beside your hospital bed for 3 nights? You, he said, his voice softening. You brought me comic books. You snuck in McDonald's when the nurses weren't looking. Do you remember how long your father visited? Yeah, he sighed. 20 minutes. Just long enough to take a photo for Facebook. I let that truth sit between us. Does that sound like a woman who doesn't love her family? Silence. Ethan, there's something you need to understand. Harper & Company employs over 3,000 people. I built those jobs. I funded scholarships, donated to hospitals and schools. And your father, along with Kelly, has been stealing from all of that. From the people who rely on that company. From your future. Stealing? How? So I explained, in terms even a Stanford business student could grasp. The diverted funds meant for charity. The offshore accounts. The ghost vendors. The personal expense funneling. Ethan understood in seconds. Jesus Christ, Grandma. Language. Right. Sorry. But seriously. Jesus Christ. And when I sold my shares to Diane, I continued, I handed them to someone who can perform corporate surgery without anesthesia. Someone who won't let family ties get in the way of doing what's right. Are you going to destroy them? I swirled the air in my empty wine glass, considering the question. Then I answered. I'm going to give them exactly what their own choices have earned, Ethan. Nothing more. Nothing less. Your father wanted to cut ties? Well, I've spent a lifetime getting very, very good with sharp instruments. He laughed even through the tension. You're terrifying, Grandma. Thank you, sweetheart. It's taken me 67 years to perfect the technique. After we hung up, I brewed myself some chamomile tea and sat down to review Diane's preliminary audit findings. She moved with the precision of a surgeon, uncovering financial irregularities that made my 3 years of sleuthing look like amateur hour. Brian and Kelly weren't just thieves. They were sloppy thieves, leaving digital fingerprints all over everything they touched. Tomorrow the real education would begin. At Diane's first audit meeting, Brian's anxiety evolved into full-blown hysteria. She demanded complete financial records from the past 5 years, full disclosure of all offshore accounts, and detailed explanations for every transaction over $50,000. Brian called me 63 times. I counted them while relaxing at the nail salon, getting a fresh manicure. Mrs. Harper, my nail tech asked with a raised brow, do you want me to answer that? It keeps buzzing. I smiled, casually resting my hand on the towel. Oh no, sweetheart. Let it buzz. It's like a very expensive vibrator. Eventually the battery runs out. She giggled and went back to painting my nails a bold crimson shade. Victory red, I thought. Very fitting. By noon, Diane had texted me updates that lit up my day brighter than Times Square. Apparently, Brian had tried to claim the offshore accounts were just part of strategic tax planning. And Kelly, ever shameless, had insisted her charitable foundation purchases were necessary administrative expenses. According to her, a $50,000 handbag was somehow essential to nonprofit operations. Later I called Ethan during his lunch break at Stanford. Grandma, he said quickly, campus is buzzing about Harper & Company being under investigation. Someone posted about it on the business school forum. How fascinating, I said. What are they saying? That Diane Whitmore bought controlling interest in the company and is auditing everything. Professor Martinez even used it as a case study in his class on hostile takeovers. He paused. Dad tried to call me this morning. I didn't pick up. Smart choice. And what would you have said if you had? Probably something about reaping what you sow. I nearly spit out my green juice. I've raced you well. Actually, Grandma, he said, his voice dropping into something sly, I have a confession. I've been documenting their spending for months now. It started as a class project on ethics in family business. He chuckled. Wanna see Dad's credit card statements from the last year? Ethan Harper, you beautiful, devious genius. Email them to me immediately. 20 minutes later, I was staring at financial records that would make a federal prosecutor weep with joy. Luxury vacations billed to the company. Personal shopping sprees disguised as client entertainment. A $30,000 wine collection labeled as office supplies. I forwarded everything to Diane with the subject line, dessert menu. Her reply came back instantly. You've raised a delightfully ruthless grandson. At precisely 3 p.m. my landline rang again. Brian calling from his office line. Mom, we need to talk. Do we? I asked, completely unbothered. Because yesterday you seemed pretty clear about cutting ties. I was angry, he stammered. Kelly was upset about the foundation audit. Upset about getting caught, you mean? You're saying she wasn't stealing? Those purchases were legitimate business expenses. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the phone. Brian, sweetheart, in what universe is a Hermes bag a legitimate foundation expense? Are we sending aid to fashion-deprived regions now? He went silent. Mom, Diane's threatening to fire half the executive team. How awful, I replied, inspecting my fresh manicure. Maybe they should have managed things better. She wants access to our personal bank accounts. How invasive. Almost like she suspects criminal behavior. This isn't a joke. You're absolutely right. Embezzlement is no laughing matter. I'm serious. So am I said. Though I hear orange jumpsuits are slimming. Mom, please. We can fix this. We'll pay it back, whatever you want. How generous, I said sweetly. His desperation was so delicious it practically needed a wine pairing. Just yesterday I was considered dead weight. Now I was his only hope. The irony was so flawless it belonged in a museum. What do you want? Nothing you're capable of giving, Brian. Money? I'll give you money. With what? Your Cayman Islands account? It's frozen. The sound he made, halfway between a gasp and a whimper, was priceless. How do you know about that? I know everything, darling. I've known for 3 years. I was simply waiting for the perfect moment to act on it. I hung up and immediately called Diane. How's the audit progressing? Like Christmas morning for forensic accountants, she said. We've uncovered 7 offshore accounts, forged vendor contracts, and enough evidence to keep federal prosecutors busy for a decade. Brian's falling apart. Kelly's already retained a criminal defense lawyer. Perfect. Phase 2 begins tomorrow. The first real confrontation happened inside the boardroom of Harper & Company. Brian had marched in hoping to stage a dramatic coup against Diane's authority. Instead, he walked straight into a calculated ambush that left him pale and speechless, and me gloriously satisfied. I arrived wearing my best navy Chanel suit, the one that made me look like I could buy and sell entire nations before breakfast. Diane had officially invited me as consulting advisor, which was corporate code for VIP ringside seat to your son's meltdown. Brian stood at the head of the long mahogany table, surrounded by anxious board members, most of whom were suddenly very interested in their coffee cups. Kelly sat beside him, clutching her designer handbag like it might float her out of the disaster. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in 3 days. This audit is harassment, Brian began, voice tight. Diane is overstepping her authority as a minority shareholder. Majority shareholder, Diane corrected smoothly. I now own 51% of Harper & Company, thanks to additional shares purchased from your mother's holdings. Brian turned the color of spoiled milk. That's not possible. Mom only had 49.8%. Yes, but I also acquired shares from your Uncle Tom and Aunt Melissa yesterday evening, Diane said with a razor-sharp smile. They were eager to sell once they heard about the federal investigation. The temperature in the room dropped like a stone. The board members shifted in their seats, finally realizing this wasn't a meeting, it was an execution. Federal investigation? Brian croaked. Oh yes. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit finds embezzlement especially interesting, particularly when it involves charitable funds. Diane opened a folder thick enough to serve as a bulletproof vest. Would you like to explain these to the board? She slid photographs across the polished table. Credit card statements, wire transfers, receipts for items that would make a lottery winner blush. Brian's hands shook as he stared at the evidence of his own crimes laid bare. This is a misunderstanding, he muttered. Those were legitimate business expenses. A $60,000 watch? One board member snapped. For a client gift, Brian said weakly. Charged to the Hope for Children Fund, Diane added helpfully. The silence that followed was heavy. You could cut it, plate it, and serve it as an hors d'oeuvre. Kelly whimpered quietly, like someone just realizing the trap had already snapped shut. I stood slowly, letting the weight of my presence settle over the room. Every eye turned to me. Brian, I said, my voice smooth but unyielding. Do you remember what I taught you about consequences when you were 7? Mom, please. You stole cookies from Mrs. Bennett's kitchen and blamed the housekeeper. A single mom lost her job over your lie. What did I make you do? Brian's face twisted. You made me confess. You made me work to pay back her lost wages. Exactly. Actions have consequences, always. I turned to the others. My son forgot that lesson. Kelly helped him forget it. Today they remember. Diane consulted her notes. Brian Harper, by majority shareholder vote, you are hereby terminated from all roles at Harper & Company. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. You can't do this. Actually, I can, Diane said, her smile freezing the air. And I am. Kelly Harper, you are banned from all company properties pending criminal charges. Kelly finally spoke. Linda, you're destroying your own family. I looked her straight in the eye, the same woman who'd erased me from photos stolen from my charities and turned my son against me, and I adjusted my grandmother's pearls. I'm not destroying anything. I'm taking out the trash. Security appeared right on cue, escorting them both out like the white-collar criminals they were. The boardroom fell into stunned silence. Tao then, Diane said brightly, clapping her hands. Let's discuss how to replace management with people who understand the difference between business accounts and a shopping spree. Through the window I watched Brian and Kelly on the sidewalk, looking small, lost, and finally powerless. Justice, I thought, tastes incredible. And the allies? Oh, they began to surface. People I never expected stepping forward one by one. Turns out Brian and Kelly had made enemies far beyond just me. By the end of the week I had an army. On Tuesday morning Ethan called. His voice was light with triumph. Grandma, he said, you won't believe what's happening at school. Professor Martinez wants to use your case as the semester's capstone project, Ethan said, his voice buzzing with excitement. It's going to be about how proper corporate governance protects stakeholder interests. How very academic of him, I replied with a smile. Oh, and 3 of Dad's former employees reached out to me on LinkedIn. They want to thank you. Personally. For what? I asked. For finally stopping what they've been calling the hemorrhaging. Apparently, Brian had been laying people off left and right while giving himself raises. Moms. Sorry. Kelly's foundation purchases were funding luxury vacations, even while she cut children's programs. I sat there in my silk robe, sipping coffee that cost more than most people make in an hour, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long, long time, validation. And not just the kind that comes from a financial win, but the kind that comes from moral clarity. Ethan, I said, invite those employees to lunch. Somewhere nice. On me. Are you building an alliance? No, sweetheart, I said with a soft chuckle. I'm building something better. I'm building proof that we were right. An hour later Diane called, practically purring with satisfaction. Linda, you need to see the results from today's audit, she said. Brian wasn't just skimming from the company. He was also stealing from the employee pension funds. How much? $2.7 million, she said. Over the course of 3 years. All rerouted to offshore accounts. It funded their lifestyle, Kelly's designer wardrobe, the renovations on that beach house in Cape May. All of it. Her voice turned sharp. They used workers' retirement savings to buy luxury tiles and custom cabinetry. My chest tightened. Stealing from me was one thing. That was personal. But stealing from loyal employees, the people who helped build this company with their time, their talent, and their faith in the mission, that was unforgivable. Diane, I want every single penny recovered and put back into those pension funds, I said. I don't care how much it costs. Already underway, she replied. Also, the FBI agents want to meet with you tomorrow. They're calling your evidence a prosecutor's dream. Well, that's flattering. And one more thing. The Wall Street Journal wants an exclusive. Their headline so far is, Business Matriarch Dismantles Corrupt Dynasty. I paused, thinking it over. Public vindication or private peace? The chance to tell my story, or the pleasure of watching Brian squirm quietly in the background? Schedule it. That afternoon I met with Brian's former employees at La Fontaine. Ironically, the same restaurant where Kelly had toasted my so-called downfall just a week earlier. 3 women sat across from me. All mid-level managers. All looked exhausted, like they'd been carrying stress I hadn't known I was complicit in. "Mrs. Harper," said Susan Brooks, former head of HR, "we thought you knew about the layoffs, the pension cuts, the budget bleeding while executive salaries kept going up." I exhaled slowly. I was kept in the dark, I admitted. My son made sure I couldn't see any of it. "We wanted to reach out," Lydia Chen added, her voice tight. "But Brian told everyone you had moved into assisted living. He said you had dementia." My hand trembled slightly, the coffee cup nearly slipping from my grip. "He said, what?" "Complete cognitive decline," Lydia continued. "He said you were incapable of making decisions. That's why he had to take full control of Harper and Company." The elegant atmosphere of the restaurant suddenly felt suffocating. My own son had declared me mentally unfit, not just to steal from me, but to justify his crimes to others. I set my cup down slowly and looked at them. "Ladies," I said, my voice clear, cold, "would you like to help me ensure that justice is done?" They nodded without hesitation. And I saw what I'd already begun to suspect. Brian and Kelly hadn't just turned on me. They had built a whole network of enemies. "Perfect," I said. "Diane's hiring a new executive team. You'll be contacted tomorrow. I want you back, restored to your positions with the authority to make sure this never happens again." "Why are you doing this?" Lydia asked softly. "We failed to protect the company." "You didn't fail," I said firmly. "You were undermined, manipulated, by and because, darling," I smiled slowly, straightening my spine, "no one steals from my people and walks away happy." As I walked out of that restaurant, I realized I wasn't simply taking revenge anymore. I was leading a movement. A revolution. And every revolution needs soldiers. Brian had no idea what army was coming for him. The crescendo of it all came days later, when Diane called an emergency shareholder meeting and laid everything bare. Brian's downfall unfolded like a play, and every seat was filled. The Madison Hall Conference Center buzzed with energy. Shareholders, board members, journalists, and even federal agents packed the room. I sat in the front row, wearing my late mother's diamond earrings and a smile sharp enough to slice steel. Brian sat across the aisle from me, looking 20 years older than he had 10 days ago. He was gray, slouched, and utterly defeated. Kelly didn't show. Her lawyer advised against it. Something about federal indictments not playing well with crowds. Diane stepped up to the podium and owned it like a maestro guiding an orchestra of ruin. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "today's presentation concerns the systematic embezzlement of Harper and Company funds by former CEO Brian Harper and his wife, Kelly Harper." The massive screen behind her lit up with high-definition slides, proof of what I'd quietly gathered for years. Bank statements, forged contracts, email threads full of twisted creative accounting strategies. Over a period of 4 years, Diane continued, the defendants siphoned $8.3 million from company operations, pension funds, and charitable foundations into personal offshore accounts. The crowd stirred. A low gasp spread across the room like a wave. Brian slumped further in his chair. The stolen funds were used to finance luxury vacations, private real estate investments, and personal shopping, totaling more than triple Mr. Harper's official salary. She clicked to the next slide. Pictures from social media. Brian and Kelly clinking champagne glasses in Santorini, smiling in designer gowns, lounging on a rented yacht, every image traced back to misused charitable funds. The journalist from the Wall Street Journal scribbled notes like his life depended on it. Tomorrow's headline was already writing itself. And most egregiously, Diane said sharply, when budget constraints forced employee layoffs, Mr. Harper approved a 40% raise for himself. The room exploded. Shareholders stood shouting. Employees cried out in disbelief. And somewhere in the chaos, Brian made a noise, half wheeze, half sob. I rose from my seat. The room quieted almost instantly. "If I may," I said. Diane stepped aside, nodding with respect. I took the microphone, feeling every inch of my presence fill the room. "Brian," I said, locking eyes with the man who had once been my pride and joy, "stand up." He rose, unsteady, his face pale. "You told people I had dementia. That I couldn't make business decisions. That I never loved you. I paused, letting the weight of each word land. You erased me from this company's history. You cut me out of family gatherings. You taught others to treat me like I was disposable. The silence was absolute. But most importantly, you forgot who taught you everything you ever knew. About business, about integrity, about what's right. I stepped back and looked out at the room. Harper and Company will continue. Under new leadership. Every dollar stolen will be returned to its rightful place. Every employee wrongfully terminated will be reinstated with full benefits and back pay. Applause broke out across the employee section. I saw tears in people's eyes. Hope. As for my son, I turned back to Brian, who now stood frozen, openly weeping. Criminal charges have been filed. Federal agents will handle what comes next. My role is simply to protect what I built. For the people it was meant to serve. Diane returned to the podium. The FBI has requested Mr. Harper remain available for questioning. His passport has been surrendered. I sat down, feeling lighter than I had in years. Around me, shareholders clapped and celebrated. Employees cheered. Journalists captured every second. And justice, sweet, glorious justice, was finally fully served. Brian remained standing at the front of the conference hall, swaying slightly, his eyes scanning a room full of faces that once respected him, now reflecting nothing but contempt. I watched it all unfold and I realized, justice is even more satisfying when it's public. Outside, through the tall glass windows, news vans were already pulling up. This story would be national by nightfall. International by the end of the week. My son's disgrace would follow him wherever he went, while my vindication would shine brighter than ever, restoring the legacy he tried so hard to destroy. It was perfect. Their last desperate move came from Kelly's side of the family. A lawsuit, filed by their attorney, accusing me of elder manipulation and coercive influence. It was laughable. Their flimsy counterattack only made my case stronger and further exposed their total moral collapse. I was sipping my morning tea on the terrace, enjoying the breeze, when Diane called, laughing so hard she had to catch her breath between words. Linda, you have to see this lawsuit Kelly's family just filed. It's comedy gold. What are they claiming now? I asked, already smirking. That you manipulated your own allegedly diminished mental state in order to trick two innocent young people into signing illegal contracts. I nearly choked on my Earl Grey. Wait, are they claiming I have dementia again? Oh yes, Diane said, still cackling. Apparently you're both too mentally incompetent to sell your shares and somehow too cunning to be held responsible for the federal investigation. Delicious contradiction. It gets better, she added. They're arguing the share transfer agreement is invalid because you were under psychological duress when you signed it. And by duress they mean being excluded from family dinner. I set my cup down gently and looked out over Central Park, where joggers were making their morning rounds with energy and purpose. I felt that same fire building inside me. Schedule a press conference. What's the angle? Diane asked. If they want to pretend I'm a fragile, confused old woman, I said, let's give the world a demonstration of just how fragile and confused I really am. 2 hours later, I stood before a room packed with reporters. I wore my sharpest gray Armani suit and a smile that could shake even a Supreme Court justice. Cameras flashed as I stepped to the podium, posture tall and unwavering, my voice carrying with decades of authority. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, I'm here to address recent claims made about my mental fitness. These claims come from individuals currently under federal investigation for embezzlement. I held up a thick manila folder. These are financial records that I personally compiled over 3 years. Bank statements, wire transfers, correspondence, audio recordings, all of it gathered during my alleged cognitive decline. Laughter rippled through the press corps. Let me be clear. My son Brian Harper and his wife Kelly spent 4 years stealing from employee pension funds, charitable foundations and company operations. When confronted with irrefutable evidence, they didn't apologize. They didn't offer restitution. They attacked my mental capacity instead. A reporter raised her hand. Mrs. Harper, how do you respond to accusations that you were manipulated by business rivals? I respond, I said, by reminding you that I graduated summa cum laude from Wharton Business School in 1976. I built a $300 million company from a single fabric shop. And I personally identified and documented complex financial crimes. Evidence the FBI now calls prosecution ready. I paused. If that's diminished capacity, I'd love to know what they consider sharp thinking. The room erupted with laughter again. And about psychological duress. Yes, being excluded from family gatherings was painful. But do you know what's more painful? Learning your son told employees you had dementia so he could steal their retirement savings. Learning charitable donations meant for cancer research funded private yachts and champagne in Santorini. Learning your own family viewed you as an obstacle to their criminal operation. The room fell silent. So yes, I said quietly, I was under stress. The kind of stress that comes from discovering that the people you love have turned into thieves. That the boy you raised now steals from children's foundations to buy designer handbags. That your life's work was being destroyed by people who mistook your silence for weakness. I snapped the folder shut. Brian and Kelly Harper are criminals. They've been caught. They're being prosecuted. And their attempt to paint me as mentally unfit only proves they still don't understand the most basic lesson I ever taught them. Actions have consequences. Another reporter stood. What's next for Harper and Company? I looked at the crowd with certainty. Excellence. Integrity. A return to the values this company was founded on, before greed and entitlement corrupted it. I gathered my papers. Thank you for your time. Walking away from that podium, I felt something I hadn't felt since this entire nightmare began. Not just vindication but peace. The public knew the truth. The law had the proof. And my name, my reputation was not only restored, it was stronger than ever. Diane met me at the exit, her grin as sharp as ever. That was beautiful, she said. That was necessary, I replied. Now Brian knows. No matter how low he falls, he'll never touch me again. My phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. Grandma, you're trending on Twitter. #1 worldwide. Business matriarch takes down dynasty. I smiled to myself. Sometimes justice doesn't sneak in quietly. Sometimes it arrives with cameras, applause, and a spotlight. Brian had thrown one last desperate attack at me. And instead of hurting me, he handed me total victory. Perfect. The final step in my transformation came when I walked into my first board meeting as the new chairwoman of Harper & Company. The respect I commanded had been earned in battle. The power I wielded forged through justice. The woman who stepped into that boardroom wasn't the one Brian had written off just 6 weeks earlier. I wore my grandmother's pearl necklace, the same one I had on when he texted me that awful message, and a custom navy Chanel suit that cost more than Kelly's stolen handbag. My silver hair was cut into a polished bob, my stride confident, my presence undeniable. The woman reflected in the glass walls was someone new, stronger, sharper, and absolutely unshakable. Ladies and gentlemen, I said as I took my place at the head of the mahogany table Brian once claimed for himself. Welcome to the new Harper & Company. Some board members were longtime allies. Others were new faces, people Diane had vetted for competence and integrity. They listened closely as I laid out our plan. Every employee Brian had wrongfully fired would be rehired. Every dollar stolen would be returned. Every corrupt process would be rooted out. Our first quarter under ethical leadership is already producing results, Diane announced, reviewing the latest figures. Employee morale is at a 5-year high. Our charitable arm is operating with 60% more efficiency. And 3 major clients who refused to work with us before have returned. Board member James Carter raised his hand. Mrs. Harper, what about the criminal trials? Brian and Kelly face federal charges for embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion, I said. Their trials begin next month. I allowed myself a small, predatory smile. I'll be testifying as the government's lead witness. And the company? Stronger than ever. Yesterday, Diane added, Stanford School of Business requested permission to use our case as a governance study. The Wall Street Journal called us a masterclass in ethical leadership. Forbes wants Mrs. Harper on the cover. There were murmurs of approval around the table. These people had watched me dismantle rot, restore integrity, and rebuild what once seemed lost. The contrast between my leadership and Brian's failure couldn't have been clearer. What's our 5-year projection? Asked Rachel Lynn, one of our newest board members, whom I personally recruited from Goldman Sachs. Conservative estimates show 20% annual growth, I said, fueled by our reputation for values, not shortcuts. We're also launching a new scholarship program through the Harper Foundation, fully funded by recovered stolen assets. I clicked to the next slide. The irony was almost too perfect. The money Brian and Kelly had stolen from charity was now being used to fund education for students who actually embodied the kind of integrity those two had never even understood. During the board meeting, longtime member David Grant asked, "Mrs. Harper, how do you feel about your transformation?" I paused before answering, glancing around the room filled with faces that now looked at me with genuine respect, instead of the condescension I'd endured during Brian's reign. 6 weeks ago I'd been labeled dead weight. I was excluded from my own family, dismissed as irrelevant. My voice echoed clearly across the boardroom, steady and sharp. Today, I stand here as the chairwoman of a $300 million company, a key federal witness in a major criminal trial, and apparently, I'm trending as a business inspiration. A ripple of laughter passed around the table. But this transformation, I continued, isn't just about me. It's institutional. Brian led with fear, lies, and theft. I lead with transparency, accountability, and earned trust. I stood tall, letting the weight of my experience and authority settle across the room like a tide. Here's the difference. When people follow you out of fear, they abandon you the moment they find courage. But when they follow you out of respect, they become allies in building something that lasts. Diane nodded across the table. Speaking of allies, we've had partnership inquiries from 12 companies this week. Every one of them said your leadership is what motivated them to work with Harper & Company. She glanced at her notes. Employee productivity is up 30%. Voluntary turnover has dropped 60%. And yesterday, 3 former employees who left under Brian's leadership asked to return. I thought of the woman I was 7 weeks ago, the one who sat alone reading that devastating text message. That version of me had been hurt, shaken, and doubting her own worth. The woman at this table had answers now. And the strength to make sure those answers would never be questioned again. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, gathering my notes with quiet authority, "this company will never again be controlled by people who confuse cruelty with strength or theft with success. We build value through integrity. We lead by example. And we prove once and for all that doing the right thing is also doing well." The standing ovation that followed was something Brian never once received. Not in all his years in power. And that was exactly as it should be. Public vindication reached its highest note when Harper & Company won the Corporate Integrity Award at the National Business Ethics Conference. I stood on the stage of the Kennedy Center, accepting the honor under bright lights, wearing the same pearl necklace that had become my symbol of resilience. My navy Armani gown needed no explanation. It spoke for itself. 3 months earlier I had been written off. Tonight I was celebrated. "Ladies and gentlemen," the presenter announced, "this year's award for corporate integrity goes to Harper & Company, under the transformational leadership of Chairwoman Linda Harper, for proving that ethical business practices lead not just to moral triumph, but financial success." The room erupted in applause as I stepped to the podium. I spotted Ethan in the front row, beaming with pride. Diane was recording the moment on her phone. Reporters from the Wall Street Journal and other outlets captured every word. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady and proud. 7 months ago I discovered my own family had been systematically stealing from our company, our employees, and our charities. Today, every stolen dollar has been returned to its rightful place. More applause. But this award isn't just about rooting out corruption. It's about proving that when businesses are led with ethics, they don't just survive, they thrive. Since implementing transparent governance, Harper & Company has grown stronger, gained clients, and expanded its social impact. I lifted the Crystal Award, watching light refract through it like hope breaking through darkness. This moment belongs to every employee who stayed ethical under corrupt leadership. Every board member who chose truth over convenience. And every stakeholder who still believes that business can be a force for good. The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. As the applause washed over me, I thought about the journey: humiliation to vindication, dismissal to leadership, victim to victor. After the ceremony, reporters surrounded me. A documentary filmmaker asked to tell my story. 3 publishers offered book deals. Stanford invited me to deliver their commencement speech. A CNN correspondent asked, "Mrs. Harper, what would you say to other family businesses facing similar corruption?" That loyalty to family doesn't mean tolerating criminal behavior, I answered. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold people accountable. She followed up. Do you have any regrets about exposing your son's crimes? I didn't hesitate. Only one. That I didn't act sooner. Every day I waited was another day someone's retirement was being drained. Another day a child's donation was misused. Another day corruption became routine. I paused, then added, I regret letting love delay justice. And what's next for Harper and Company? Excellence, I said. We're expanding our scholarship program, opening operations in 3 new countries under strict ethical oversight, and launching a global initiative to help family-owned companies adopt transparent governance. I adjusted my grandmother's pearls and added, we're proving that integrity isn't just the right thing to do, it's also the most profitable. That evening at the celebration held in my honor, I received calls from CEOs, governors, and activists who'd been moved by the story. The mayor wanted to meet about economic initiatives. The state governor invited me to join her business ethics council. A senator floated my name for a federal commerce advisory position. Later I stepped out onto the hotel terrace. Ethan joined me, gazing out at the city skyline. The lights below shimmered like a river of stars. Grandma, he said, grinning, you're famous. No, sweetheart, I smiled. I'm vindicated. There's a difference. Are you happy? I looked out over the city, watching cars snake through the streets like veins of gold light. Was I happy? Or was it something deeper, fulfilled, steady, whole? I'm at peace, Ethan. For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I belong. Doing exactly what I was meant to do. He smiled at me, the only one who never doubted me. And yes, I added, that makes me deeply happy. The irony wasn't lost on me. Brian had tried to destroy my reputation and made me more powerful than I'd ever been. Kelly had tried to erase my legacy, and instead she helped build something even greater. Sometimes justice doesn't just restore what was lost. Sometimes it gives you something better. That night, surrounded by praise earned through fire, I realized my greatest victory wasn't defeating Brian and Kelly. It was becoming the woman I was always meant to be. 6 months later, that new legacy had fully taken root. And the best revenge? Was living so well your enemies become irrelevant. Now I sit in my downtown loft, surrounded not by plaques and awards, but by artwork, by light, by peace. I fund dreams instead of fighting nightmares. I finally understand what real power looks like. This morning began like every Saturday for the last 3 months. Ethan arrived at 10 a.m. sharp, croissants and coffee in hand from that little French spot near Stanford. He settled into his usual spot on the Italian leather sofa. At just 19, he already had more integrity than his father ever did. Watching him grow into a principled young man has become one of my greatest joys. Grandma, he said, pulling a folder from his backpack, Professor Delgado wants to interview you for his new book on ethical leadership. He flipped through pages. Also, 3 more family businesses contacted the university for help with transparency reforms. How many does that make this month? 15. He grinned. You've officially become the go-to expert on governance transformation. I laughed as I turned back to reviewing scholarship applications for the Harper Foundation's latest program. 50 brilliant young women from low-income families were about to receive full university funding, complete with mentorship and resources, each of them handpicked for their integrity, ambition, and leadership potential. The money Kelly once stole to buy designer handbags was now investing in the next generation of women who would lead with values she never possessed. Speaking of business models, I said, signing the last of the approval letters, each signature changing a life, Diane wants to formalize our consulting partnership. Apparently, family businesses around the world are asking for the Linda Harper treatment. Are you interested, darling? Ethan asked, watching me over his mug of tea. At 67, I said with a smile, I've discovered I have a talent for corporate exorcism. Why waste it? My phone buzzed with a message from Diane. Netflix approved the documentary. Linda Harper, the woman who wouldn't disappear. Production starts next month. The irony made me laugh. Brian had tried to erase me, and instead he made me unforgettable. Ethan, I said, do you ever wonder what your father's doing now? His expression turned thoughtful. Actually, I saw him last week. He's working downtown at a consulting firm. Junior analyst. Small cubicle. He looked smaller, like he'd shrunk. He hesitated, then added, Kelly divorced him 2 months ago. She moved to Los Angeles with the kids. She's trying to become a lifestyle influencer. He rolled his eyes. Teaching people about authentic living, under a fake name to avoid her criminal record. Strangely, I didn't feel anger or satisfaction. Just a kind of soft indifference. These two people who once occupied so much space in my mind and heart had become footnotes in a story that had moved far beyond them. Do you miss them? Ethan asked quietly. I miss who I thought they were, I said honestly. The son I believed I'd raised. The family I imagined we could be. I set down my papers and looked at the young man in front of me, this extraordinary human who had never once let me down. But I don't miss the reality of who they actually were. Later that afternoon, I visited the Harper Foundation's new headquarters, a beautifully restored brownstone in Williamsburg where young entrepreneurs received funding, mentorship, and the tools to build ethical businesses from the ground up. Today, I had a meeting with Maria Torres, whose sustainable fashion startup had just secured its first retail contract. Mrs. Harper, Maria said, showing me prototypes made from recycled materials, I want you to know what this opportunity means. 3 years ago, I was cleaning office buildings at night to support my kids. Now I employ 12 people. I'm proving business can be profitable and responsible. That's exactly why we exist, dear, I told her. To prove success doesn't require sacrificing your soul. As I walked through that building, seeing young women from all walks of life creating something with integrity instead of exploitation, I understood something powerful. My greatest victory wasn't in dismantling Brian's criminal enterprise. It was in creating something better in its place. That evening, I returned to my loft and called Diane to prep for next week's board meeting. Under ethical leadership, Harper & Company was thriving, now valued at over $400 million and globally recognized as a model for stakeholder capitalism. Linda, Diane said, her voice carrying just a hint of tension, I have news. Brian called today. He wants to meet. What for? To apologize, she said. To make amends, supposedly. I sat on my terrace as the city turned gold beneath the sunset, thinking. After months of silence, my son wanted reconciliation. Not because he'd found morality, but because he'd finally started to feel the cost of what he'd done. What should I tell him? Diane asked. Tell him I'm busy building something beautiful, I replied calmly. If he wants to be a part of something meaningful, he can apply to work at the foundation like anyone else. I smiled to myself. If he demonstrates real change and genuine remorse, maybe, just maybe, we'll consider giving him the chance to earn forgiveness. And if he doesn't? Then he'll stay exactly where he chose to be, irrelevant to my story. That night, I sat outside with a glass of wine, reading thank you letters from scholarship recipients whose lives had been rewritten with money once spent on handbags and first-class flights. Just beyond the glass, Central Park stretched wide and green, defiant and beautiful, growing in spite of everything that tried to suppress it. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Brian. I deleted them without listening. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you have a story of your own, I'd love to hear it. Your voice matters.